everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited today to talk to these three people about the mobile marketing funnel. It was really interesting. Yesterday I ran into a few people who had actually bookmarked this panel and talk about how excited they were to hear from all of you. So, so they're here hopefully today. Made it out? Okay, great. So to get started, it'd be nice to hear just a little bit about each of you, where you are now, and a little bit about your background.
Sounds good. I'll get started, and I apologize for my voice. It was their supporting tune last night. But I'm Raquel, and I just joined Shutterfly in December as their director of mobile marketing. And before that, I was at Electronic Arts running the paid acquisition and engagement team for about 6.5 years. And actually, Nick over here was in my team for a long part of that. So it's great to be up here with you.
Yeah. So I'm Nick Kwan. I'm on the consumer marketing team at Twitter, focused on mobile user acquisition. And like Raquel said, before Twitter, I was at EA on her team, focused on mobile user acquisition as well. And before that, I was actually at InMobi, so I got a little bit of the publisher side experience as well.
Hi guys, James Peng. I head mobile acquisition for Match Group. For y'all that don't know, Match Group is the collection of the leading dating apps in the world, such as Match, OkCupid, Tinder, Plenty of Fish, all those which are in the top 100 grossing. Before that, I was heading mobile user acquisition at StarMate, iOS, Android developer, and before that, I was working in the finance world.
Okay, thanks. So one thing that I think is really interesting that I also noticed yesterday with the CMO panel is that you all have a games background. So I'd just love to hear a little bit about why it is you think that people from games move into consumer mobile. Also a little bit about why or what you have found has been different or challenging in making that shift.
Yeah, I guess I'll go first again. And it's just great because we've all worked together in the gaming space, and now we've all branched out to very different companies. And we were talking about this yesterday, but I think the biggest challenge for me was twofold. First, it was for the first time feeling a little bit out of my own depth, right? You're so used to being an expert in what you do and talking the language and, talking about all these mobile KPIs, and then all of a sudden you're at a web-first company, and in my case, more e-commerce, and the language changes and the KPIs change, and you really just have to kind of retrain your brain at the same time as you're really teaching the company on how to be a mobile expert. So that's been really interesting. And I think the reason why a lot of companies are trying to hire folks like us that come from gaming acquisition is because gaming companies really have been at the cutting edge of doing user acquisition and performance marketing. I don't know how it's been for you guys.
Yeah, sure, I'll just go ahead and jump in. So I guess the main reason for me joining games in the first place is, again, as Raquel said, you're going to be on the cutting edge. They're the biggest spenders and kind of the smartest spenders in the space. And I think that's where, I think what you learn in games is how people spend money and kind of where. So you learn all the channels very thoroughly and kind of all the dimensions of the channel. So from social to game to ad networks to exchanges, why would you use each, and kind of how do you win on each? But then when you move over to the non-games, it adds a whole degree of complexity, because the question is, who plays casual games? Well, probably you, me, and quite a lot of people do. So it's not that hard to advertise for it. But when you look at more niche apps like let's say a Uber or a Match, we're looking for a very specific type of user. So it becomes incredibly many times more difficult because you're trying to dissect and find that specific user. So now it's not so easy. Not all ad networks just work for you. So I think that's the kind of additional complexity to it. You need to understand your user much more in depth than maybe your traditional games company. So I think that type of background really informs and helps you to think about that next level.
Yeah, I would say echoing both of what Raquel and James said, I would agree with both of that. I feel like the gaming guys really did set the stage and define how performance marketing should be done on mobile. And my biggest change for when I went from EA to Twitter was actually a deeper focus on traditional marketing. So again, really going in with the consumer, understanding your brand, how do you market that brand and reach the right consumer. Those are definitely the big challenges.
Great, yeah, it's really interesting. So let's jump into the mobile funnel. I'd love to hear a little bit about, on your teams, how do you devote time and resources to sort of the three different sections, either discovery, conversion, re-engagement? How does that break down on your teams?
So my role is more general marketing. We're not spending the dollars. We have a whole separate team that is in media, but we do think about it as more acquisition, consumer-facing, like new customer-facing, and engagement, which right now is really mainly push and email. So we do think about it in the two big chunks of the funnel. I think going back to your first question, though, in terms of what's been different and merging that with the funnel, is even how the companies look at the funnels, right? So at EA in gaming, we're used to talking about, the first-time user experience and the day two retention, and 99% of our users don't spend a dime. So you really are looking at the whole user pool. When you go to e-commerce, you're really looking at the customer, and you're talking about the customer, and not as much time is being spent on the top of the funnel, like the registrations, and how do you maximize them, and how do you convert them. And so that's both been a learning experience that, it's been a difference in the industries, but also just, a different way to look at the funnels, like really focusing at the top, at the bottom. How do you shift the company to start looking at the top as well and maximize those users?
Sure.
Yeah, so I would totally agree with that. The discovery, we actually have a separate brand team who focuses on like the branded campaigns with the branded metrics, so that gets us with the discovery. I would also say that I noticed search campaigns becoming a bigger piece of the pie when I went from gaming to non-gaming, especially at Twitter. And a lot of that data that you can get from the search campaigns really gives you a strong signal of what the user's obviously looking for and what they want to find on Twitter or whatever they're interested at the time. And yeah, so I would say for discovery, definitely looking at like CTRs would be a key metric that I'm looking at. And
which we never looked at EA.
Yeah, we did care more about like the CPIs.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so when we think about funnel for Match, I'll just focus on Match.com as a brand. At the very top level, just the awareness. I think we have a whole team that spends a lot of money and time on kind of just getting your brand out there, making sure everyone knows what Match.com is, which I think most people in the room do, luckily. So that's the awareness part of the funnel, and then it moves on to my team, which we focus on the acquisition piece, which is after people know who it is, what it is. Now let's inform them how to use it and how to kind of get involved and actually become a user. So that's our job, is to put that right message in front of them at the right time. And so we probably spend more time than anything else on the targeting and finding the precise users. So, and that's kind of because of a couple reasons. One, because it's probably the most critical part of it, but two, it's also the most difficult with kind of the current options and the current state of targeting in the app install world. So we definitely over-index there. And then kind of touching on the after the install, getting them to use and re-engage in the app. We probably focus a little less time there, just because we have a pretty robust kind of internal CRM. We rely on our product to kind of re-engage users instead of trying to coax users back in through ads necessarily. When we look at kind of mobile re-engagement, like paid re-engagement, I think a lot of it works well for a lot of e-com, because they're able to find like a specific maybe item that you're looking at and present it in front of you, whereas it works a little bit different for dating.
Sure. So back to this point on finding the right person as being challenging. What is it in terms of tactics that you guys actually employ and think about to try to find those exact right people that you're looking for?
Yeah, so I would say to find the right people, you have to know your audience. Number one, like that is probably the most critical part. You can't find who you don't even know who you're looking for. So number one is, I think the more you know your audience, the better that you can be very targeted in finding them. For example, in Match, we break our audience up into, I would say, as many different kind of permutations as we can by age, by gender, by different characteristics. For example, if they have children, if they have a certain if they live in a certain area, there's so many different dimensions that we collect in Match that allow us to segment our users by different permutations. So we break those up, and then we find the channels that are able to actually target by those parameters. For example, Facebook is one that obviously comes to mind. They know a lot, probably more about the users than a lot of different other ad networks and channels. Twitter also has a lot of targeting options. Google is starting to get there and is definitely becoming much more robust. Again, on the ad network side, I'm going to touch on this because I want to push the ad networks. A lot of them just simply don't know who their users are for the most part. Like even gender and demo targeting is difficult there. And I think it's rapidly improving, but quite challenging. So So that's why it's very important to align the right channel, to really utilize the channel to the max in terms of what their targeting capabilities are versus your understanding of your audience. And then the third step is putting the right message there.
Right.
So
and
if
then,
you
so it's dealing with that delta, I guess, between what you know versus what the ad networks are able to provide you with. Do you have any sort of ideas on how people can help manage that?
Yeah, I think I think it depends on your strategy. Our strategy and our goal is to be kind of everywhere we can. If a user is using a phone, I want to be in front of them as much of that 100% of their time as possible. So that involves being on the exchanges and ad networks, even though they're tougher. So, for example, you have to think outside the box when it comes to ad networks. I think outside just publisher targeting. How can you use the data that they have to help them target more? I think a lot of ad networks kind of struggle with pushing the next boundaries of their technology and their targeting. So I think what's helpful is if you think along with them. Hey, what data do you have? Do you have kind of prior install data? Do you have app graphs based on kind of install data? Are you able to listen to ad calls and things like that, and then piece together probabilistic pictures? What can you do to kind of better your picture? I would say we try to use as much data indirectly and directly as we can to sort of maximize our output. And we work very, very closely with each of our top ad networks to really maximize that, because I think it's
Yeah, I was going to say, so I remember in the early days of gaming user acquisition, when Facebook didn't even have really an app install ad product that worked, what we would spend a lot of time doing with the ad networks was spending a lot of money and time and buying as much as we could and then dissecting that post-install data. And we wouldn't necessarily know, like, these users are, single females or whatever, but we would be able to see by the post-install data that they were highly engaged and monetizing. And again, we wouldn't know a lot about them, but we would know that this sub-site, this creative on this network is working, which, with tools like Facebook, where you can kind of start from the beginning knowing that it's going to more or less work, it's a little bit frustrating, but that's, one way we kind of got around it as well.
Sure. So again, at this stage, this discovery stage, before we move on, what across your companies do you find are the most important KPIs or benchmarks that you look to, or metrics that are top of mind?
So I think, the top of the funnel, definitely you look at installs, the quality of the installs, always installs with ROAS, not just number of installs. But for me, what's been most interesting, having been at EA and being so focused on acquisition, top of the funnel, has been now starting to look more and more at engagement. I know you mentioned that as well. And how to use push notifications to drive users back into the app and whatnot. And we've had a lot of discussions around how do you drive engagement for such a seasonal product, right? Like, people don't buy photo books every day. They could, check their crops or whatever, play games every day, but they're not making photo books and buying prints every day. So how do you drive that engagement? And we know that people are addicted to their phones, so it's a great platform to do that. So to us, it's been really coming down to discussions around what are the right features to build that can drive people to keep coming back to Shutterfly, whether it's inspiration or whether it's to work with their photos, right? So one of the things we're talking a lot about is this functionality we have, which is throwback, which is like rediscovering your memories, similar to Time Hop. Another one is, how do you make it easier for the user or for the consumer to just go about their lives, right? So your birthday's coming up. We want to let you know that your mom's birthday's coming up and you should make a photo book, and just providing those solutions. And then the last piece has been around photo storage as a value add. So we do unlimited free storage, and we've provided a somewhat easy solution to get all the photos off of your phone into somewhere where you can do more with them and consolidate it. And I think that's another way, another feature that can drive more engagement with photos. That's not necessarily bottom of the funnel, like purchase focus, but we believe that that engagement and people coming back to Shutterfly will drive that bottom of the funnel conversion.
And I also just want to jump in about ad networks. So I do want to push ad networks as well to be a lot more transparent with us. I would say that a lot of times ad networks are constantly asking for, we're asking for user quality. So they're like, okay, what points, what data can you send me to signify user quality so I can get you user quality? That's great, that's awesome. Totally down for that. But we also want more data from you guys as well, especially for Twitter, because users who are coming into Twitter have this discovery mindset. There's so many interests and topics happening on Twitter. that the ad that they click and the publisher that the ad was served on shows a lot of intent of what that user was consuming and what they want to see more of in Twitter, and that's why they click the Twitter ad. And so if I have more data from my ad partners that I could feed into the Twitter product and customize that new user onboarding experience, I think that just leads to a lot more higher engagement for our users as well.
Sure. Yeah, because I think this was something that I also heard on a panel yesterday. I think someone else sort of raised your point around, like, come on, ad networks.
Yeah.
So it's good to hear it again.
There's,
Hopefully they're listening.
So I think when I think of top of the funnel, there's one thing that just only one KPI I really want to spend the most time on, and that's click to install conversion rate. And because the reason I focus on that is because click-through rate, great, signifies you got the right creative, it's attractive, but click to install. Why is that so important? Because I think this is the single most highest leverage component of your CPI. Kind of when you're looking at let's look at conversion rates for ad networks, exchanges, etc. I would say without the robust targeting that's available, that can range from 0.1% to maybe 5% optimistically especially I'm talking more for non-gaming. Gaming apps may achieve somewhere in the kind of, call it 2 to 10% range. But then let's look at the opposite side of the spectrum, extreme targeting. If you're able to, have a very focused 1% kind of lookalike audience on Facebook, that's, very, very carved out. You may get maybe upwards of a, 40 to 60% installed
Right.
click to install conversion rate. And what is that? That's, that factor of whatever it is, like 40, 50, 100x, that is targeting. And that's you knowing the right user and hitting the right user. And so that's a difference. That's that leverage in eCPM, is your ability to pay from a, $1 CPI to a $100 CPI. And that's, knowing the right user and being able to get the right value out of it. So I would say that's the KPI that's most important, that I find the most important, that I'm monitoring probably more than anything else, but yet it's one of the simplest ones.
And you guys are both really focused on paid acquisition, right? It sounds like in terms of your metrics and whatnot. In my new role, I focus a lot also on our owned channels and looking at those KPIs. And you talked about click to install. When you're leveraging your own channels to drive installs and hitting up your existing web customers, those CTIs really get in the high range, and the revenue per install gets really in the high range. So talk about getting really targeted too. It's like leveraging your own channels in conjunction with paid.
So I wanted to touch, Nick, a little bit on your point about the onboarding. It's one of these things that with mobile is a little bit tough sometimes. Some people don't even really have an onboarding flow. In your case, it seems to be really important to how you think about getting users actually into the product and converting them.
Yeah, especially for Twitter, because it's all about the content that they start following, all the accounts they start following. It's really going to make or break their experience on Twitter. And so, for example, if I know a user has clicked a ad that's targeted that has sports ad copy on it, so like, hey, follow your favorite athletes or whatever, then I should definitely be leveraging that data and customizing the user experience so that it's leaning towards sports and it's showing them maybe based off their location, like here in San Francisco, like, hey, here's some 49er players, like follow them, and just giving them the best experience possible up front. We've seen just leads to a lot longer engagement at the tail end.
So are you guys actually customizing the funnel in the app depending on where they click on the ad, or is that ideal state?
That's the ideal state, yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So a little bit on the final piece. So you're all like, this final piece of the funnel. How do you guys think about, one of the things that I think is interesting is, how do you balance new users versus re-engagement? And how do you think about the value of each? How do you think about if you have equal amount of money or time or resources to spend? How do you make that decision and evaluate the outcome of each? I
think when we were talking, you kind of mentioned, like, if you had $2, would you spend it on a new user or re-engaging? Yeah. And I think what's really interesting, what I've found, is that if you spend those $2 in re-engaging a user, it's going to look like a higher ROAS, right? Like, you're essentially talking to a very, very qualified audience, somebody who's already bought your product, probably wants to buy it again. So I think the risk there becomes in taking those $2 to be more efficient by just kind of looking at that immediate ROI and not accounting for incrementality, right? So how do you know that that user that you just re-engaged wouldn't have made that purchase without that ad, right? How do you know you're really making them, pushing them over that hump and not just enabling a behavior that was already going to be there.
Because in your case, even it's like maybe you do that campaign, but it's right before Christmas.
Right,
And they were
and they were
planning
gonna
on
do it
making
anyways,
a Christmas
yeah.
thing anyway.
So exactly, that's a great example. And so what becomes really hard is measuring that incrementality, right? If in an ideal world, you want to have a holdout group that looks just like the group you're targeting and reengaging, and seeing if their LTV follows the same trajectory as the group that you are spending to reengage on, or if there's really incremental lift and value there, and using that to measure. And then I think you can ask the question, spend $2 on a new user or to reengage. But really, if you're just looking at it typical, like what was the revenue after the reengagement event, that's always going to look better than buying a net new customer. And then the last thing I think a lot of people forget is that a new customer becomes a customer, right? So you can't look at them as separate. A new customer becomes a customer that's going to get reengaged. So they have intrinsic value there that hasn't been realized yet that you have to model. So at EA, we did a lot of predictive LTV where we said, okay, you're worth this much now, but we know that you're going to drive this much more value once we re-engage you, and we do push and email and sales and paid engagement ads. So you have to take that into account as well. Otherwise, the new customer may look less profitable in the short term.
Sure. And then James, I think you have an interesting suite of products also where there's this question around re-engaging people when in actuality you maybe want them to not be engaged because they've had a great experience with the product. And I know like with dating products, it's always really interesting to talk to people about how they think about that problem. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, so to kind of rephrase your question, I think it's around like churn, the fact that if your product is too good, then you lose a user, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting, but I think we want to build the best products, and we want to help you find the right kind of the right person, the right relationship, or whatever experience it is. I think that it's kind of self-fulfilling, and I think the good thing is the trends overall are in our favor. The kind of trends around marriages, relationships, people being less, monogamous, and just I think overall, it's. If we build the right product, the thing about Match Group is we have products for people in all stages of life. So kind of whether you're a little younger, middle-aged, a little older, whatever it is that you're seeking, we've got the right product for you. And so inevitably people cycle through dating. I'm sure a lot of you in this room have gone through that cycle in the past year alone. So find yourself back on the dating market. So if you'll probably find yourself coming back to our products at one time or another, even if you've monetized at one point in time. So we just have to play that cycle and know that kind of the right users may not be the right users at a certain point in time, but find them again at the right point in time. That's why not just finding the right user, but putting the right creative and finding the right moment to tackle them is a really important approach. And so that's why having intent-based kind of lookalikes is even more important than just a user profile. So I think there's beyond that kind of third dimension of a user. I think there's a fourth dimension that we need to constantly think about, and that's one thing I would love for again the ad tech space and targeting to become so advanced that we can target that fourth intent dimension very easily.
Yeah, it's interesting. So wrapping things up a little bit, I'm curious to hear a little bit about how you guys think about your overall mobile marketing funnel and how okay, I'm going to go in and tweak some copy, change some creative versus whiteboard, whole new thing, completely change the strategy. And what sort of drives that type of decision, and how do you evaluate that?
I think the right answer is, before what you're doing stops working, you're already working on the next,
ideally,
on the future. In reality, a lot of times it's when you have this kick-ass campaign that's working, and then all of a sudden it starts to not work anymore. You're like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? Let's fix it. So I think the right answer is you're always iterating and working on something new, and because that it's going to get stale, and what works today is not going to work tomorrow. So it's kind of a non-answer, but I think the ideal is you should always stay on top of it. And then I think too, just in terms of the little iterations and the daily iterations you mentioned, you can't get comfortable there, right? Like you have to keep going, because one day you're going to wake up and you're going to find your Facebook campaign overspent $100K, and you're like, what happened? My CPIs went up to $10 and they didn't even catch it. So you really have to stay on top of it in real time.
Yeah, I would say like a lot of testing new different creative copy, new publishers and new ad networks. That was a big change for me from going from gaming to non-gaming, because then my publisher mix changed dramatically, right? Because in gaming, you could find the gamers in games. But with non-gaming or with Twitter, there's a lot of non-gaming inventory out there that works really, really well too. So, I did have to change up my strategy a little bit because what I knew was gaming, and then I had to adjust to non-gaming and adjust to the customer base that I was trying to find for Twitter.
Yeah, so for us, it's always about having having a very customized creative towards the audience. But again, I'll keep it high level and simple. Testing, iterating is definitely, the right approach. However, we always throw an element. I would like to throw an element of kind of randomness and just some fresh ideas in there.
That's always hard. Like, how do you stay on top of the day-to-day testing iteration, but also open it up for your team to innovate and try new things?
Yeah, so final question on new things. Quick 10, 20 seconds on what you're most excited about with respect to mobile marketing.
For me, because I come from a very web-focused company, it's going to be this interplay between mobile, web, and apps. Okay. We've talked a lot about instant apps and everything like that.
Yeah, I agree. It's like mobile web inventory and just like how the tracking and how targeting will progress there is super interesting to me as well, just because a lot of times the mobile web inventory have these verticals and have these audience bases that these app guys just don't have. So, for example, TMZ.com is very accustomed to people who are social connectors and looking for celebrity news, but that doesn't really exist anywhere else in the app ecosystem.
For me, I think it's just the advent of kind of targeting and the evolution across the mobile ecosystem. I think ad networks are going to have to fight to retain their inventory because you have things like Audience Network and Twitter Audience Platform that is really just increasing the targeting across the spectrum and offering up their data to increase your eCPMs. And so I think that publishers are going to have to, the ad networks are going to have to fight to keep that inventory unless they evolve. And because you have advertisers like us who are becoming incredibly smart about their targeting, and we're able to pay multiples of what games advertisers are about, to get the same users. So, it's about unlocking that eCPM. I think with additional data and being able to enrich impressions and stop wasting impressions when you advertise. When that happens, it's going to be a whole kind of change in the ecosystem, and publishers are going to get paid more. We're going to, overall ad revenues are going to increase, and I think it's going to be mutually beneficial for everyone in the space.
Great, fantastic. Okay, well, James, Nick, Raquel, thanks so much for your time. It was great chatting. Thanks everyone.